One would think that any top-selling musician would end up rich, but not every rock superstar has a superstar bank account to match. In fact, these well-known musicians are surprisingly strapped for cash. Creed's brand of anguish-turgid spiritual rock captured the rock radio airwaves and CD buyers' dollars in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The group, led by the gravelly belting of frontman Scott Stapp, sold more than 30 million albums, took the power ballad With Arms Wide Open to #1 on the pop charts, and landed a couple of Grammy Award nominations. Creed officially split up in 2004 due to personal and professional disagreements between guitarist Mark Tremonti and Stapp, but every original member except the singer moved on to a new band called Alter Bridge.
I heard you say that you isolated yourself from your own bandmates.
Yeah.
And they misinterpreted that as, you think you're better than us.
Right.
What happened to Stapp? He released a solo album that sold 1 million copies and reunited with Creed in 2009. And then he went broke.
I had to sleep in my truck. I had no money, not even for gas or food.
Stapp explained that he did a self-audit during which he discovered huge sums of money were missing, and that he was owed a fortune in unpaid royalties, even though as late as 2013 he'd received $1.5 million from his record label. He also claimed that he was being unfairly targeted by the IRS. A few days later, Stapp started a crowdfunding campaign with a goal of $480,000 to make a new album and write a book. In the 1970s, when Kiss was one of the biggest bands on the planet, Ace Frehley handled lead guitar duties. Known as the Space Ace for his stage character, the albums Frehley played on sold more than 20 million copies. He earned substantial royalties for his work, even after a series of interband disputes led to his departure in 1982. When the original Kiss lineup reunited for 3 concert tours in the late 90s and early 2000s, Frehley was paid on a per-show basis, to the tune of about $18 million altogether. But about a decade later, Frehley found himself in dire financial straits. In 2013, his mortgage lender foreclosed on his home in Westchester County, New York. Frehley hadn't made a payment for 2 years. At that point, he had paid off just $35,000 of the $735,000 property, and he owed $20,000 in local taxes. In 2024, Frehley released a solo album, 10,000 Volts, but wasn't able to promote the record overseas since he couldn't leave the country. He explained to Chaos Zine, "I owe the IRS a couple of $100,000, and they just instituted a new law that if you owe more than $50,000, they won't renew your passport." Sly Stone, along with his band, The Family Stone, defined the pop sound of the late 60s and early 70s. Equal parts soul, funk, and rock, Sly and The Family Stone recorded joyful hippie-era anthems including Dance to the Music, Everyday People, Hot Fun in the Summertime, and I Want to Take You Higher. The band moved about 8 million albums before they started to fall apart in the 1970s, once Stone's substance use began to occupy his attention. In 1983, Stone was arrested for cocaine possession, and he mostly retreated from public view after that.
Well, I got tired. So I retired.
As late as 2007, Stone lived in a lavish house with its own vineyard in Northern California's wine country. But by 2011, he was essentially unhoused and living in a van. He nearly received a windfall in 2015 when a Los Angeles court ruled that Stone was owed $5 million in unpaid royalties. Later that year, though, a judge reversed the decision after discovering that Stone had signed away the royalties in 1989 for a 50% ownership stake in a production company. Sigur Rós took rock music to strange, spooky, and mystical new places. One of the most famous and successful musical acts to ever emerge from Iceland, the experimental group made major commercial breakthroughs in Europe and the US. The band generated a lot of income in the 2010s in particular, but according to Icelandic government authorities, it failed to pay taxes on those earnings. In 2019, a district prosecutor in Iceland completed a 3-year investigation and filed an indictment against the band alleging tax evasion to the tune of 151 million Icelandic krona, the equivalent of about $1 million. Sigur Rós blamed its accountant for the discrepancy, but the court seized and froze the musicians' assets, including their apartments and houses. The band was cleared of wrongdoing in 2021, but the decision was later reversed, with prosecutors refocusing their case on frontman Jansi Bergesson. Those charges were dropped in 2023. The 1970s was the golden age of teen idols, conventionally attractive and highly marketable young men hired to sing songs, pose for photographs, and sell tons of records and merch to impressionable young people. From mid-1977 to late 1979, the most popular teen idol around may have been Leif Garrett, a conventionally attractive teenager with big blonde hair. He made the rounds on the variety shows and scored hits with covers of pop standards like Surfin' USA and Runaround Sue, and light disco tunes including I Was Made for Dancin'.
If you were a teen in the 70s, no one star shone as brightly as this satin-clad, blonde-haired glam pop singer.
But Garrett's moment in the sun wouldn't last. By 1980, audiences had moved on to the next hot young guy, and Garrett was washed up before he was even 20 years old. He didn't take it well. Garrett was arrested multiple times for drug possession. He tried to get straight, checking into various rehab programs, but wasn't always successful.
Leif Garrett came with a fresh wound from a
from a pipe that you use for crack, you know?
By 2001, Garrett filed for personal bankruptcy. He was unable to pay his bills or a $76,000 credit card debt with his only income, a $1,000 monthly allowance from his mother. As of 2025, Garrett's personal net worth was reportedly somewhere in the $10,000 range. A protege of pop R&B producer and songwriter Babyface, soul and torch song crooner Toni Braxton debuted on her mentor's soundtrack for the 1992 movie Boomerang with the hit Love Shoulda Brought You Home. A year later, Braxton's self-titled debut album exploded onto the airwaves, with singles like Another Sad Love Song and Breathe Again. Braxton hit #1 in 1996 with both You're Making Me High and Unbreak My Heart. But due to the singer's complex, draconian record contract, she took home just $1,972 in royalties against the $170 million in revenue she earned for her label. Braxton explained to ABC News that all the expenses of her career, like music video production and studio recording fees, were deducted from her cut.
What happens is they'll give you an advancement on the next record, and then the next record, so you kind of stay in debt in a sense.
That devastating lack of income, coupled with Braxton's spending habits, buying housewares, art, and other luxury items, led her to file for bankruptcy in 1998. Braxton was financially stable by 2000, but her next few albums didn't sell. In 2010, Braxton once again filed for bankruptcy and was forced to sell her Nevada home.
When the checks come back, you know, when they send them back to you in the mail, you are the first person to open them. You never let anybody else open them.
In 2012, Braxton's mansion in Duluth, Georgia was taken by a bank through foreclosure. The radio-friendly pop-rock band Toto came out of the Los Angeles session musician community. Individually, the members of Toto played on thousands of session recordings for other artists. They hit the top 5 in 1978 with their first single, Hold the Line, and it looked like they were headed for mainstream stardom. Altogether, Toto sold more than 14 million albums, with about a third of that coming from 1982's Toto 4. That record won the Grammy for Album of the Year and included the band's biggest hits, Africa and Rosanna. The record sales started to decline in the mid-80s, and the band finally called it quits in 2008. As part of the split, Toto ordered an audit of royalty records held by their label Sony. They subsequently filed a federal lawsuit against Sony, citing breach of contract and asking for $605,000 in damages. Sony filed a request for dismissal, and in 2014, a judge decided that the company didn't owe Toto anything. All the debt incurred from the legal action forced Toto to record a new album and head out on tour once again. Member Steve Lukather told Smashing Interviews, "It was born out of litigation." Multiple labels wanted Tommy James and the Shondells in 1966, but the band signed with Roulette Records. The head of that company, Morris Levy, had told the other labels to back off, and they did. No surprise, because Levy was reportedly deep into New York's organized crime world.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Word was that he routinely threatened or enacted violence against any perceived threat, up to and including his own label's acts. Country pop act Jimmy Rogers asked Levy for 9 years' worth of royalty payments. Rogers was beaten almost to death in December 1967. But Roulette gave James full creative freedom. On the other hand, as James told Classic Rock, getting paid was different. It was like taking a bone from a Rottweiler. Instead of paying James the royalties he was owed, Levy would give him bags of cash when he needed money. It was under this system that James racked up a string of massive hits in the late 60s. Including Hanky Panky, Mony Mony, and Crimson and Clover. Well aware of Levy's mob affiliations, James remained on Roulette into the 1970s, but he finally got fed up with not being paid, at least not properly. With his accountant, James went to Roulette's record pressing plant and audited their books. James explained, "I was owed between $30 million and $40 million. Levy flat out threatened us. You. If you ever try and use that against me, you will find yourself in the river." He meant it. Before Levy died in 1990, he sold Roulette to Warner Brothers, which allowed James to recoup a fraction of his unpaid royalties. James rightfully wasn't satisfied, saying vast sums were still owing, which I didn't see. Randy Travis, a country music traditionalist who nevertheless became a major star in the slicker, more modern 1980s and 90s, nearly lost everything in 2013. He developed an upper respiratory illness that led to viral cardiomyopathy, a condition that can cause permanent heart damage or death. Travis recovered, but then suffered congestive heart failure that led to a stroke. The singer underwent brain surgery and needed 2 years of rehabilitation to regain basic function. Unable to play the guitar, sing, or speak like he used to, Travis lost his main source of income. That's when he learned that no financial safety nets had been put in place. Travis was under the impression that his management had taken out a hefty disability insurance policy in case he should ever lose his voice. They hadn't. On top of that, royalty checks for his previous work had stopped years before because he hadn't sold past the advances or made good on loans taken out against future earnings. Throughout his career, Travis sold 23 million albums, but little of the financial gains ever made their way to the artist. In the 90s, Ryan Adams helped create the alt-country genre with his acclaimed band Whiskeytown. Along with his prolific solo career, Adams often played with other musicians, playing sessions with Tim McGraw, Willie Nelson, and John Mayer, as well as offering his services as a mentor to several younger female musicians on the rise. By 2019, 7 women, including indie rock star Phoebe Bridgers and Adams' ex-wife Mandy Moore, had come forward with disturbing allegations against Adams. Some claimed that he'd offered to help them build their careers with the expectation of sex in return.
I was emboldened by the fact that there were other women that had been in the same situation, many other women.
For his part, Adams denied allegations of grooming, coercion, psychological abuse, and public and private harassment. Immediately after the accusations became public, Blue Note Capitol Records canceled Adams' deal as well as the release of 3 upcoming albums. Promoters called off a concert tour, his management dumped him, and Adams couldn't find much production or songwriting work. By 2021, Adams was facing financial ruin. Speaking to Los Angeles Magazine, he lamented, "I'm losing my life's work and my dream of who I am, my ability to provide for myself."
I do find it curious that someone would sort of do an interview about it without actually making amends privately.
In a series of Instagram posts, a panicked Adams begged for forgiveness and work, writing, "I'm months from losing my label, studio, and my home. I'm 46 and scared I'm going to be living in my sister's basement. If you are a label and interested, please let me know. If you or anyone you know needs help with addiction issues, help is available. Visit the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website or contact SAMHSA's National Helpline at 1-800-662-HELP 4357.